Welcome from the Salt and Light Media Studio at Nebraska Family Alliance. I'm Nate Graz, Executive Director at NFA, and I'm honored to be joined today by Jason McGuire, who serves as the Executive Director for the New York Families Foundation. Jason, thank you so much for being with us.
Nate, it's good to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, well, we are thrilled to have you with us in Nebraska. You do incredible work in the state of New York, really trying to advance the same mission that we have for families, for freedom, and for life. But we also know that looks a lot different in a state like New York. You've been a very influential and impactful leader in the pro-life and pro-family movement, so much so that you found yourself on the radar of the New York Attorney General, who targeted you because of your Christian convictions and pro-life advocacy. What has it been for you that keeps you going when you're in oftentimes a state and a culture that is so actively pushing against the things that are right and true?
Yeah, I mean, really going back to 2018, we came under investigation by the Attorney General's office for nothing, really. There were never any charges brought or anything along those lines for several years. And then at the end of the day, they found three misrecorded transactions from 2021. So many of these investigations began even before there was anything there. And so, you see it as lawfare. It's weaponization of government. And someone asked me recently if I've forgiven Letitia James for, what she has done to the organization and what led to essentially 53 days of intermittent incarceration for me. I spent time in jail as a result of Letitia James' lawfare. And I had to pause and think about that. Like, have I forgiven her? But it was odd in the sense that I never was angry at her either. Like, I didn't experience the bitterness from that. Because I see people that are in elected office, oftentimes they're pawns of a spiritual warfare that's going on. And oftentimes those elected officials don't realize the full extent of the agenda that they're moving. And the fact that we're drawing attention from the other side and from those that are opposed to us and ultimately spiritually from a spiritual enemy, well, we take that as a good sign that we're moving in the direction the Lord would have us to go.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And to me, it's evidence that you're doing something right, because when you are standing for truth in a world that's trying to silence it, you're going to take some arrows, and as you've shared, there's a cost. There's a cost to following Christ. There's a cost to standing for what's true, and the temptation that I think all of us has, is to step back, to do nothing, to be quiet. You have been faithful in standing for truth in New York, and I want people to understand, because to me it's not an exaggeration that you were a political prisoner in the United States of America for 53 days in a New York County jail because of your beliefs, because of what you stand for, and that was the cost for you, for your family, for your organization. And I remember, as we were learning about this and when we found out that you were actually going to be spending a night in jail. And I just remember, it hit me that, you and I, we have the exact same job. And yet it was you who had to go to jail. But there were so many people who have been praying for you, who've been advocating for justice. Where are you at, now as you look back on what went on, where you're at today, and how have you seen God working through it? And I'm sure when oftentimes you didn't know what the outcome would be or what the purpose was.
Yeah. Sometimes people talk about the faithfulness through the persecution and all of that, and I appreciate that, and I love the fact that people say it encourages me. But the reality is, God didn't give me a way out. Had there been a way out, had there been an escape hatch out of this process, I probably would have taken it a long time ago. My spine isn't that stiff, and when you watch how it impacts your families and other things, there wasn't a way out. And so, what I think rather what has happened though is the Lord has allowed me to have this path and this platform for a reason I don't always understand, but I've just accepted what He has for us through this. And so it wasn't until we prayed, Lord, take this away, Lord, make it stop. It was just, Lord, if you're going to have us walk this path for whatever reasons we don't always understand, Help us to use it to your glory and for your purposes.
Yeah.
And so now we have opportunities to talk about what is going on, the injustice that is occurring in our state. When you talk about the weaponization of government, it is real. And it is a warning sign for every state in the nation. If progressives, if leftists are allowed into positions of power and authority, this is what they would do. And we're increasingly seeing that in our culture, that there is the abuse of the authority to advance an agenda that frankly, they don't have the arguments to win. And so this is the only way they can win those arguments. And we're seeing that increasingly so. And so I think it's helpful for us to look to states like New York and even signs from California and other more blue states, and to be reminded in states that maybe are more pro-life or are more red, whatever it might be, to say, you know what, there's things we can do to make sure it doesn't happen here. Yeah. And that's, I think, the message that I would like to bring to Nebraska and a lot of other places around the country, is to say, stop it now. You don't want to have the Mayor Mamdani in New York City. You don't want to have those people that are in positions of authority that are wicked people that are causing people to groan. But you want people that are righteous in authority so that people can rejoice.
Yeah, yeah, amen. And so oftentimes we bump into this this idea that maybe Christians are better off if we just avoid government and politics, if we keep our beliefs to ourselves, if we don't get involved. And I think your story and what's happening in New York is exactly what people need to realize can happen, because you were targeted and punished by your own state government for advocating for and believing the same things that we advocate for and believe here in Nebraska. And so it matters, who we vote for. It matters who we elect. It matters the leaders that we have in our state. And so I want to ask, in the midst of all that, in a really tough political environment in New York, how are you able to forge ahead and to do this work on behalf of still a lot of families in a huge state like New York who want a better future for their kids and grandkids, who want to be a state where God is honored and life is protected? So what does that look like for you in a state like New York?
One of the things I have to tell myself, people say, how can you stay encouraged in a state like New York? And remind people that my hope is not in this world. Yeah. And so when your hope is not in this world, my expectations are in a different place. And when I realize that ultimately human government is always going to fail, when I realize that our greatest solution is not political but it's spiritual, well, then my expectations are low for what man will do. But I also recognize that I cannot ignore the political realm or ignore what is going on in the world around me. If I ignore it because it will make my life easier, it does not make it easier for my children or my eventual grandchildren. If we want to see future generations that have liberty and a state and a nation that recognizes life and parental rights and families that are thriving and all of those things, then it's going to be more difficult in my day. Because someone has to take that battle. Someone has to take those arrows. We have to take those stands that our children can live in greater periods of peace and prosperity.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so for you, for New York families, I hope that, I think you're right. We often look to states like New York and California, and we can see those things start to seep in to other states. What is your message? What do you want to tell people who are here in Nebraska, and maybe they're learning about your story for the first time? Maybe they've seen headlines about the new mayor in New York City and what he stands for, and what should our response be to some of those developments?
It's interesting because when you watch what happened, we'll look at the federal level with President Trump. He had a very populist message, right? And when he started running for office, we didn't know what he would do in a lot of these pro-life issues and a lot of these things that were out there. And still, there's folks have to be held to the fire in some of these things, do the right thing when it comes to the pro-life values and other issues. We saw Mayor Mamdani do the same thing. He took populist messaging, but he took it from the left's perspective. And so we're living in a day in which I think people are looking at the populist messaging on both sides.
Yeah.
You hear both the right and the left using phrases like affordability, right? I now have the left and the right embracing things that, frankly, I'm concerned about. Universal child care in my state. I don't think it's the responsibility of government to raise my children. Right. It's the responsibility of parents to do so. But we are now looking in New York's case about just universally funding child care from age 2 up. I mean, that's a real problem. not just from a fiscal sense, but from a social science perspective of what that will do to kids. And so we have to recognize that there is a populist moment that's occurring right now. And you're going to hear words like affordability. You're going to hear buzzwords that are out there that both sides are going to use. But you have to dig deeper and look at what are the real policy results that will come if those things are implemented. And I think that's important to understand. The other thing is to realize that, we talk about California and New York, but as I travel around, every state's got areas that are more difficult than others. And so there may be areas that are easier to win for the values you and I care about in your own state. And there are pockets of your state to where the ideas of socialism, other things will advance more readily. Do not let it advance. But also don't ignore what is being said in those movements. There's a reason why young people today are struggling with housing. Why they're struggling with some things going on with the college debt they're experiencing. There is frustration over housing. And if we as conservatives can bring real solid solutions, real conservative solutions to those problems, and we can listen to what is going on in that culture and that generation and show them that there is a conservative path to having liberty and freedom and why it matters, well, then I think we have an opportunity. But if we simply ignore it and just kind of, pass it off as just a young people's problem, well, that's how they're getting picked up by the Mayor Mamdanis of the world.
Yeah, that's really insightful. And I think, too, we have to get the message out there that we're not just against things, but we're for things. We're for life. We're for families. We're for kids being protected and being able to reach their God-given potential. And also know that you've also served as a pastor, and you get to speak and preach in a lot of different churches. So as you operate in this space, that oftentimes a lot of people, don't know how to think about politics and faith or religion. What's the message that you want people to leave with in terms of how, as believers, we can think about and engage with the government and culture around us?
When I first got involved with this work almost 20 years ago now, I went into the legislature anticipating that I could win every argument because God's truth is truth, right? And we just simply win the strength of the arguments. It hit me very quickly that politics doesn't always work that way. You don't always win by the strength of the arguments. But I do think that we can go in there and we can take God's truth, and when we go in there in a winsome and articulate way, make the case for why we believe what we do, just in a very persuasive, but with a sweet smile on your face, I think you can win a lot of these things. We live in an age today in which there are a lot of keyboard warriors, and there's a lot of anger on social media. I often refer to the cranky conservatives that, we'll be out there and we're banging out the keys and we're getting, things out there, and we think we've owned somebody just because we've slammed them with an all caps on a social media post. That's really not how you win these arguments. You can turn an awful lot of people off. And so how much better if we are living out the truths of the gospel through our churches, through our ministries, helping young moms that are struggling with whether or not they should have an abortion. Women don't choose to have an abortion because they're excited about it. They see no other options. And as we walk in this world and we can present options for people and help them to see there's a better path, there's a better way, and it happens to be God's way, well, I think then we can win a lot of these arguments, win a lot of hearts and minds, and begin to advance in the days to come.
Amen. That's exactly right. It's not just about winning policy debates for the sake of winning policy debates. It's about winning hearts and minds and glorifying Christ in everything that we do. So, Jason, thank you for being with us. More importantly, thank you for your continued faithfulness and an example of what it looks like to follow Christ faithfully, to seek to do his will, and to seek and defend truth.
And Nate, it's been great to meet your team, to be here, and just to see the great work that you're doing here in the state of Nebraska.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.